Hey folks, I'm Kenneth of the Videoboys, and welcome to Kenneth's Corner. Here I talk about random stuff about movies and their trends and whatever else comes to mind. Today it's superhero films. You may have noticed we've been reviewing a lot of superhero films lately. We've pretty much finished the Dark Knight trilogy, we're going to start the Avengers series, and Grant is in the process of eviscerating the Amazing Spider-Man. Our reasons for reviewing these may have to do with the obvious increase in the production of superhero films in recent years and the fact that 2012 was a big year with the conclusion of the Dark Knight trilogy and the long-awaited crossover with the Avengers. And another reason we're reviewing them is that we enjoy them. I've seen a lot of reviewers out there, Confused Matthew, Nostalgia Critic, SF Debris. They all push the idea that superheroes are the equivalent of this century's Greek mythology. In many ways, I think they're right. So I think the reason why we love comic book superhero stories is a pretty important thing to explore. On the one hand, you want to be these heroes because having powers would be awesome. On the other hand, when you have a character that could do almost anything at any time, you got a bit of a disconnect there with those heroes, because they have fewer vulnerabilities than us. So what gets us to really connect with these people is who they are and what drives their stories. As you may remember in our Green Lantern review, I referred to a need for a human connection. In parts of the review that were judiciously cut for time, I talked about the core conflicts in Superman and Batman as contrasting positive examples of what Green Lantern failed at. We must have a human connection to the core conflict to appreciate the character. Otherwise, the film is just the powerful good guy versus the tough bad guy, which isn't that intriguing overall. For me, there's an essential film for each specific superhero, and that's the one that A, deals with the primary core conflict that typically comes from the comic books, and B, is a good film. Here I'll go over the core conflicts of Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, and to a lesser extent the X-Men, and I'll point out the film I think conveys them the best for each one. These won't be full reviews, and I'll try to keep spoilers to a minimum, though I think that's impossible with these films. Now, please bear in mind this is just my opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of all the Video Boys, and they're more than welcome to provide their own input as they've probably read more comics than I have. Of course, you're more than welcome to provide your perspective in the comments below, even if it's that I'm a complete idiot that doesn't get superheroes. So, with that in mind, let's begin. Okay, Batman. Now, I bet you were expecting me to say The Dark Knight. After all, I made a review praising most of the character stuff in that film. But I really don't think it's a Batman film so much as it is a Joker film. I mean, you really get to get into that character's head in that film, so that might be the essential Joker film. And of course, the prequel and sequel were Batman films, but for me, they don't really fit the mold of the core conflict, which is Bruce Wayne walking the line between vengeance and justice in his role as Batman. So, in many adaptations of the character, he creates the hero persona not because Gotham needs it, as was the case in the Dark Knight trilogy, but because he needs it. It's kind of an outlet for his personal demons after the criminal act that took his parents. But, to prevent his crusade as Batman from turning into an act of vengeance, he includes a no-kill rule. In Mask of the Phantasm, he faces a villain that's someone he could have become. A character who was also wronged by criminals but undergoes a crusade of vengeance by killing a bunch of mobsters and trying to kill the Joker. Over the course of the film, because the character's costume is so similar to Batman's, Batman ends up being the one who's blamed for all the crimes, and we see him hunted by the police. He essentially becomes the person he's trying not to be. Towards the end of the film, he has an exchange with the character.
But Andy, what will vengeance solve?
If anyone knows the answer to that, Bruce, it's you.
From this he learns that because of his obsession to be a crime fighter, kill rule or not, he might be enacting his own brand of vengeance against those who wronged him. It's as if every time he puts on his costume he's trying to stop those 2 bullets that took his parents. His ending battle with the Joker further illustrates this, as the Joker, he isn't employing some nefarious plan. It's simply the fact that he's free and will no doubt kill again. The scene's entirely focused on Batman's need to catch him. The theme finally hits home with the speech from Alfred at the end, who helps to reassure Bruce that his obsession hasn't overcome him.
Vengeance blackens the soul, Bruce. I always feared you would become that which you fought against. You walk the edge of that abyss every night. But you haven't fallen in, and I thank heaven for that.
Admittedly, the Dark Knight trilogy and the Batman anthology, they try to convey these themes, but for me they're less effective, as in the case of one of them, he doesn't have a no-kill rule, and in the case of another, he kinda sorta has a no-kill rule. All good films though, mostly. Now to Spider-Man. So, based on my limited understanding of the comics and what I've heard from Grant, the core conflict for Spider-Man comes through how Peter's personal life is affected by him being Spider-Man. The villains are mostly incidental plot devices and obstacles to help convey this. Spider-Man 2 does exactly this. In our intro for the Spider-Man series, Grant mentioned that Spider-Man contrasts many of the other superheroes by the fact that he gets his powers when he's a teenager. Of course, Batman and Superman's stories begin with them as children or infants, but they don't become the heroes until well into adulthood. Peter's problems as a teenager are carried into his adulthood. Now he conflicts with the three most important people in his life. He can't be with MJ, he conflicts with Harry because Harry blames Spider-Man for his father's death, and he reveals a truth to Aunt May that's pretty distressing. Spider-Man 2 asks the serious question of how one would be able to maintain a normal life if they have to be a hero. Batman and Superman, of course, sidestep this by just not living normal lives. As I mentioned in my Spider-Man 2 review, the best aspect of the drama is when Peter meets his lowest point. MJ is marrying John Jameson instead of him. Harry despises Peter because he thinks Peter's hiding Spider-Man. May is mad at Peter because of the truth. Peter's lost his job, he's doing badly in school, he can't pay his rent, and his only comfort is in cake and milk from his landlord's daughter. No, that's not a euphemism. So why pick Spider-Man 2 and not one of the others? Well, for me the main conflict in Spider-Man 1, while it is pretty much this conflict, it's heavily focused on the main villain, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It adds to Spider-Man 1's uniqueness, but I think it's conveyed better in Spider-Man 2, just for me personally. I know Grant would probably disagree with me there, but in regards to Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man, the personal issues are either hackneyed and contrived, or just dropped without any explanation. Hopefully the upcoming Spider-Man sequel, the sequel to Amazing Spider-Man, will learn from these mistakes and be able to do what Spider-Man 2 did. Superman. Once again, I'm not too familiar with this character's comics, but it's my understanding that the core conflict for Superman is in him dealing with his inability to save everyone. As powerful as he isn't perfect, and he can't be everywhere at once. This is introduced when Jonathan Kent dies in the 1978 film.
All those things I can do. All those powers. And I couldn't even save him.
Donner's Superman does something very interesting with this theme, as it wasn't originally intended to be the focus of the original cut. The filmmakers took the ending of what was at the time a partially filmed sequel to that film and put it at the end of this film. Then they had to rework the film to include it. Granted, there are some continuity issues as a result of this, but it also allowed the film to revisit and bookend the conflict.
My son, it is forbidden for you to interfere in human business. One thing I do know, son, and that is you are here for a reason. It is forbidden
All those things I can do. All those powers. And I couldn't even save him.
Towards the end, Superman is faced with not being able to save Lois Lane because he had to save other people. Realizing that he's lost another loved one, he decides to disobey his father's decree that he shouldn't interfere with human history, and he turns back time and saves Lois. Now, I admit, this conflict is resolved in a ridiculous way. Time travel makes the character a little too powerful, but it allows for some really strong scenes to be included, and Christopher Reeve really sells this as Superman. Interestingly, I haven't seen this theme conveyed again in pretty much any Superman adaptation. There might have been an episode in the animated series, I think it was the Earth 2 episode, where they touched on it, but to date, the 1978 film is the one that really made an impact with that. I also think it's the film that really hasn't been surpassed in any other film adaptation, though many are holding out for the new film, Man of Steel. Will it convey this theme? Only time will tell. The X-Men. So from what I've seen, the core conflict with the X-Men deals with humans not tolerating and being bigoted towards mutants. All of the films except for Origins Wolverine have dealt with this in some way, but I think overall X-Men 2 deals with it the most, as the movie's about humans forcing Professor X to kill all the mutants. And there's a number of scenes conveying the bigotry, like the awkward scene with Iceman's family. But overall, though, I don't think X2 is really the essential X-Men film, because most of the film, like the rest of the trilogy, is the Wolverine show, pretty much. I think the conflict should be focused on Magneto and Professor Xavier, because they represent both sides of the mutants' reaction to the bigotry. By focusing on Wolverine, you lose a little bit of this. I think he should have been a smaller part in the bigger story focusing on those other two characters. Now, of course, X-Men First Class does focus on these two, but because it's a prequel, you can't really explore this theme very much, as most humans at the time aren't even aware of mutants. So, to conclude, that's my take on these specific comic book superhero series, and which films I think are the essential one for understanding both the characters and their core conflicts. As I mentioned, of course, we have yet to see one that really hits the X-Men one, but the others you can kind of understand. If you have your own ideas regarding these characters or their main conflict, please list them below. Goodbye for now, and please keep an eye out for the continuation of our superhero reviews, and for those of you who don't like superhero movies, don't worry. After we finish with the Avengers, we're going to move on to something completely different.